Hi everyone, this is Quotidian Light, and this is Ear Stretching 201, More Advanced Topics. This question came from a viewer of one of my earlier videos where I was really stressing the importance of stretching slowly. And her response was her ears are stretching on their own. She's having a hard time retaining size, and what can she do to stay at one size? And this topic, I'm going to be addressing it on two fronts. First, how you can maintain size when your ears want nothing to do with that size. And second, when is it okay to stretch faster than my typical, a millimeter to every 6 months or so? First, I want to say that it is very important to stretch slowly. It allows your ears to retain their thickness. It gives it time to produce new skin, because really as you're stretching, you're creating more surface area. And so your skin needs time to really knit all those fibers and not end up with scar tissue and whatnot. But after a certain point, you'll find that stretching gets easier. So a 1 millimeter stretch when you are, at 14, 12, 8 gauge is very different than a 1 millimeter stretch when you're at 1.5 inches. And you'll find that as for everyone, there comes a point where they get to a certain size and they get to a point where all of a sudden their ears stretch really easily. And it's a different point for everybody. Some people, it may be when they hit 1 inch. For me, it was about 1.25 inches. When I hit 1.25 inches, all of a sudden I noticed that if I was using tape, my ears would loosen and stretch on their own very quickly. And so, whereas at a smaller gauge, it may have taken me, several weeks to tape up to a new size. At a larger gauge, I can actually be that size without tape, and I can pull my earring down and see, a 2 millimeter gap above the earring quite easily. So how do you stay at a size if you don't want to go any bigger? This is something I've dealt with primarily because of these plugs. Okay, I've had many plugs in my life. I've had a lot of requests for a plug collection video. I haven't done one because I've actually gotten rid of a lot of my plugs. I don't consider my collection very extensive. A lot of my plugs I sold, and a lot of my plugs, I worked in a sales environment where we had tile floors. So a lot of my stone plugs actually got chipped or shattered at work. And so I probably have maybe 8 pairs of plugs left that I truly, truly love. And originally I had this pair and one other pair that they were personally made. This one weren't for me, but the other pair were hand carved for my specifications, and they were really special to me. And so I always knew that if I went any larger, I was going to have to replace these plugs, which are really expensive, and then the other pair of plugs I wouldn't be able to replace because the people that carved it are no longer carving. So it kept me at one size. I had those 2 plugs that I love so much that I wouldn't be able to replace. And for that reason, I stayed at 1.5 inches for a very long time. I've been at 1.5 inches I'm trying to remember when I had my ears scalpeled. I'm guessing it must have been 5 to 7 years ago. So I've been at this size for a long time, and my ears do want to stretch on their own. If I wear my earrings around the clock, my ears will stretch very quickly, and I will find within a couple months I will be well past 1.5 inches without any work or without having to actually stretch, quote unquote. And so the way that I've gone about maintaining my size is really quite simple. First, I massage my ears like every other day. If I massage daily, my ears stretch much faster. And second, I sleep without my earrings in. Now, that's helped significantly, but it's not foolproof. all those beautiful, expensive, hand-carved stone plugs that I paid out the wazoo to have custom made for me back in the day when I had money. The reason why they broke was because I would just be walking at work and my earring would just fall out because my ears were stretching on their own. So a couple things I found really help with that is, in addition to sleeping without plugs in, if you're somebody that wears like regular plugs to work, I find that regular plugs look much more conservative in a work environment. And so if you're someone that wears like solid plugs to work, when you get home, switching out to a lighter pair of eyelets is extremely helpful. I have a pair of jade eyelets that I tend to wear whenever my ears get too stretchy because they're lighter and they do allow my ears to shrink up a little bit. And I will wear them often, a couple days at a time. You'll notice I go a lot without any plugs at all at home. And that's because if I wear plugs around the clock, my ears will stretch very, very quickly. So those are the three things that I've found help me retain size is sleeping without plugs, wearing lighter plugs, or going without plugs whenever I'm not at work or not someplace special, and massaging a little less often. I find that using a regular oil, I love emu oil. They make my ears really stretchy. So unless I'm stretching or unless I'm specifically working on something, usually I will use a different oil. I'll use just any kind of body oil. This is Weleda rose oil, and I just use it because it absorbs quickly and it smells good. So a lot of times people will just use too much oil or too thick of an oil, and it will cause you to drop plugs in public, which is a problem if you're wearing a delicate set of plugs, which is what happened to my really special flower plugs. They fell out, and they'd fallen out of my ears a million times, but they fell at just the right angle and they broke in two. So using a lighter oil or just using less oil can really help with that. Now, what if your ears are stretching really quickly? Is it a problem? Not necessarily. If they're doing it on their own, you're fine. You can stretch as quickly as your ears naturally want to stretch. There's a difference between forcing your ears to stretch and allowing your ears to stretch on their own. And this is the reason why at smaller gauges, everyone says never dead stretch, because at a smaller gauge, your ears usually are just not that flexible. But at a large gauge, often you can, and I'm just going to put this in. The reason why I'm doing this video today is because I've decided it's time. I'm going to go ahead and start stretching again. So I'm wearing my plug. When I pull it down, I have a lot of space. I'm not sure if you can see that. Yeah, you can't really see it on the camera. I have like a 1 or 2, more like a 2 millimeter gap above my plug. So if I wrap my plug with bondage tape, 2 layers of bondage tape, I'm not actually stretching my ear. What I'm doing is I'm filling up the empty space. And because my ears are larger and very healthy, whenever that space is filled, my ears naturally expand to create new space. So what I do when I stretch is I will literally put in just enough tape that the space is no longer empty. Then I'll wait. And depending on the weather, how often I'm massaging, whether I'm leaving my plugs out at night, I will develop a new gap within anything from a couple days to a couple weeks. And so that is the one instance where when people stretch faster, I don't actually think it's unhealthy at all, because they're not forcing their ears to stretch. They're just accepting the stretch that their ears are naturally doing. You're going to find this a lot once you get past a certain size. You're also going to find this a lot if you get your ears scalpeled. And I'm going to do a video on ear scalpeling because there aren't a lot of videos out there and it is important. But one thing to know is This happens when your ears are scalpeled, and when your ears are scalpeled, you have to retain a tight seal in order to keep the bleeding down. Like, you can't have that space. Your plug needs to be tight in there. And so a lot of times, if you're scalpeling to an inch, you may find yourself at 1.25 inches. You may find that you have to get a new plug like every couple days, literally. It's kind of crazy. But that's another situation where you're not forcing the stretch. You are accepting the stretch that your ears are doing on their own. So really what this video is about is to say, yes, there are certain techniques you can do to help retain size. But if you decide to accept that stretch, that can be done in a healthy way. If you're going to accept the stretch and your ears are stretching more quickly, just tape until the gap is filled up. Don't tape any tighter than that. And as long as you do that, your ears are going to keep loosening and stretching on their own, and you're going to find that you're going to stretch faster and in a more healthy way than if you tape it really, really tight and then every day you're adding a new layer even though there's no gap. It's just going to be a much healthier stretch. Now, that said, for some people, if they have really meaty, really elastic earlobes, you may never be able to keep your ears like really snug. And if you are dead set against allowing your ears to go any larger, I recommend finding really lightweight plugs with really, really big flares. Rain Designs is known for huge flares. I used to hate these earrings because they were hard to get in. But I will say, as my ears self-stretch, these big flares are a total godsend, because these earrings are one of the few pairs I have that don't fall out of my ears. They're heavy, but they're lightweight for 1.5. 1.5 inch plugs are kind of heavy. But that flare is fat. It's, you can find plugs that have over a 1 millimeter flare. And if your ears consistently want to stretch on their own, investing in those types of plugs or investing in custom made plugs with a bigger flare will go a long way to making your life more comfortable and allowing you to stay at one size. I hope this helped. Ciao.